You're listening to Arcane Carolinas, an exploration of the Carolinas' folklore, legends, myths, and modern weird. Each episode, we examine the historical context of our topic and aim to preserve some of the stories that help make this part of the world such a fascinating place.
Hello, I am Michael G. Williams, award-winning horror, science fiction, and urban fantasy author, and one of your co-hosts for this episode of Arcane Carolinas.
I'm your other co-host, Charlie Mushaw, and I just threw Michael for a loop by saying, hey, why don't you bring us in this time?
For the co-host of a podcast, I'm not accustomed to initiating conversation very much, so I don't know.
Well, you're driving today.
Yeah, apparently I'm driving today. No, I know I'm driving today. Today's episode is about a topic that, if I remember correctly, someone requested. Is that correct?
That is correct. This was a listener request. Actually, in talking about it with people in the area, several people either knew about it or wanted to talk about it. One person I'm friends with actually has used some of the technology involved, a couple decades back. And I'm looking forward to hopefully doing a follow-up episode. We've talked about this like in the fall where we do like a 1-year recap where we like have follow-ups and stuff. And after we do this one, I'd like to have him on and tell us a little bit about the type of technology involved in this story and his experiences using it. Also, thank you, Patreon backers, for voting very heavily for this one. They did not know the exact nature of it. It was described as a not so secret base.
I like that a lot. Yeah. That's awesome.
And one other thing I wanted to mention is that we recently put up postcard sets of some of our title card art into our web shop. Go to arcanecarolinas.com, click on the store button, and it'll take you into our web store. And we're sold out of most everything right now. I'm trying to figure out how to get t-shirts made for cheaper. But we do have these postcard sets because people have responded positively to the art. And actually, a couple people have already bought sets of the postcards. They're suitable for mailing. They're suitable for framing. They're suitable for filing away in a drawer and forgetting about them for 5 years. Use them as a bookmark.
They look really, really cool, though. They're super cool.
And if these ones do well, we'll do some more. There's plenty of doodles and art laying around to continue this as an ongoing series if people really like this first batch.
Great. So today's topic is something that I knew about before you mentioned that this was in the big list, because I went to college at UNC Chapel Hill, about 20 minutes away from this thing. And that is the Big Hole of Chatham County.
The Hole.
It's got a lot of names colloquially. Some people call it Big Hole. Some people call it the Chatham County Hole. Some people call it, the Hole.
Well, it sits on Big Hole Road. Like, that is the name of the road.
Yeah. Now, for a long time, that was not formally its name.
Okay.
For a long time, that road was unmarked.
Well, I went out there and took a picture of the street sign, and we'll put it up on Facebook and Instagram.
Awesome. So when I was in college, our understanding was that this was some sort of military facility that was actively guarded, and going up to the gate was a bad, dumb idea, which, generally speaking, in the case of a lot of that sort of dumb ideas, are only pursued by people who should never have done that in the first place. Like, it's not just a dumb idea, but the worst possible candidates for executing the dumb idea are the people who do try to execute it. So I knew a lot of people, what I'm saying is, who drove up to the gate and then got told relatively politely that they needed to just turn around and leave.
Right.
Yeah.
And that still happens. It is still a secured facility. I'm sure you'll get into what goes on there now or who owns it now. But the way I heard about it was there's a secret underground bunker with unmarked SUVs that will suddenly appear at the gate if you try to go in, and armed guards will kindly tell you to leave or you will be arrested.
What I had always been told was there's a really high chain link fence. There's barbed wire. There's multiple layers of fence, variations on that. And if you sneak up to it, you'll be seen on camera. Guards will come and get you. If you drive up to it, guards are there and they'll tell you to leave. And there's never a time when it's not attended by that sort of security force. But also that the only thing there is a giant round hole deep into the earth. Just an enormous open chasm.
So, deviating from the hole for a minute, you find this a lot with old tuberculosis wards or sanitariums where they know people want to go into them, and generally they fall into disrepair and they'll hire like a Pinkerton security security guy. And he'll sit there in the little marked Pinkerton Security Services with the yellow light on the top. The way it was described to me was not that.
No, the way it was described to me was these are military personnel.
Yes.
It's also been described to me various ways. And when again, in the 90s, when I was in college in Chapel Hill, the story was that it was just literally a gigantic earthen hole that was actively being guarded for some reason because of whatever was down there. That's not actually totally accurate. We'll get to what it is.
Well, there are giant holes. Like there's a giant hole in Russia, isn't there?
Totally.
Is it Russia that I'm thinking of?
There's one in Siberia.
Yeah. In the imagination of college students, I feel like that could seem feasible.
Totally. What it is from the surface is a small facility with a couple of buildings that are kind of oddly shaped and are covered in antennae and satellite dishes and a huge parking lot with room for many more cars than you could possibly fit people into these two small buildings. A massive, like couple of 100 acres facility, completely surrounded by fencing, regularly patrolled, and with armed guards at a gate that is more than just like a gate into the parking garage, but is a big metal gate that protrudes out of the ground to block ingress or egress.
Yeah, it's black and yellow striped, comes up out of the ground.
Yeah.
The gears turn.
Totally. Yeah. Nobody's going to just drive through the gate with their car like something out of a movie in this place. This is something where if you tried to get in, you would destroy whatever you're driving. And the rumor when I was in college was that it was a nuclear site, like a silo or multiple silos, and that there were nuclear missiles there.
Which again is completely feasible. I want to say it was the 50s. I could be wrong on this. Somebody fact check me if I am. One of the original missile defense systems on the eastern seaboard was known as Nike missiles. They sat on the concrete pads. They were above the surface and they were all up and down the East Coast, and they were meant to intercept missiles from Cuba or Russia or whatever. And then as technology developed and we got intercontinental ballistic missiles, those are the ones where, the Nike facilities still existed, but in supplement to them, underground silos were built because those rockets, missiles, whatever you want to call them, required so much more space. But they, and in this episode, where Charlie admits to trespassing, statute of limitations is up. In the early 2000s and late 90s, I snuck into a decommissioned missile facility at one point, and it was really cool. It was a Nike base, so there was no secret, huge underground tunnel, but there was radar towers and big platforms where you could see like where the missiles had been. So again, that is completely feasible for college students in the 90s to think like, oh yeah, they're hiding missiles there.
There were a lot of theories floating around at the time and a lot of reports of weird stuff in and around the Chatham County Hole. And I'm going to cover the weird theories before I get to what it actually is.
I mean, there's still a lot of weird stuff in Chatham County.
Chatham County is a very strange place.
This is our third or fourth Chatham County, North Carolina story.
Yeah. I didn't bother covering anything about the history of Chatham County or the history of the region or anything like that because we've talked about Chatham County a lot because there's so much weird stuff in Chatham County.
It had big Stranger Things vibes, right? Like secret government installation.
And in fact, the Chatham County Hole is one of the things that inspired Stranger Things.
Oh, yeah, because they're from here.
Yeah, they're from Durham. So they grew up in Durham hearing stories about the Chatham County Hole like everybody else did.
Awesome.
In the year 2000, Indie Week, The Independent, the local Triangle free weekly newspaper, story about the Chatham County Hole, where they included a whole bunch of people's reports and claims and theories and things like that. And so here are some of the theories. Some of these I took from the Indies, some of these I took from just having lived here. One, it's aliens, secret alien base. That it's one of those places where the government and the aliens have worked out a deal and the aliens are allowed to come and go as they wish and abduct whomever they wish and do whatever they are allowed to do under the terms of whatever agreement they are believed to have with the U.S. government. I find that a little unlikely because there have not been a ton of UFOs flying in and out of the place, but there have occasionally been people who claimed they saw UFOs near it. Another one is a secret government installation for government listening posts, a la Carnivore. Are you familiar with Carnivore?
I'm not. Enlighten me.
Late 90s, early 2000s, there was a program called Carnivore, and the deal with it was that basically the 5 English-speaking powers from World War II, so the UK, Canada, the United States, Australia, and New Zealand, cooperate to eavesdrop on international communications.
Yeah, this is ringing a bell. Yeah.
They share resources. At the time, the thing that made it a big deal was that that carnivore included internet communications. And at the time, a lot of internet communications passed through one of those 5 countries, even if they were communications between people in countries totally outside of those 5. So the idea was that carnivore was hoovering up all of the communications, and then people at the NSA and its equivalent in these other 4 countries would just sit around and listen to everything, read everything, do whatever.
Can you imagine what a boring job that would be?
Oh, it would be so awful.
Like, I have no doubts about data collection and the ability for people to listen in. But can you imagine, like, the idea that someone's full-time job is to sit there and listen to every person?
Right. When I was an undergraduate at UNC, I worked for the help desk on campus. And one of my jobs was to answer the emails that came into the big generic email inbox that people could email just questions to. And we would regularly get people saying, "Do you read all of our emails?"
Yeah.
Is there somebody on campus who reads all of our emails? And my answer was, do you have any idea how many people that would take? Like, it just doesn't make sense.
So we've talked a little bit about our day jobs. And one of the things that I get a kick out of is when people are like, "Do you know what I do on my computer?" I'm like, "I don't care."
Right.
I don't care.
Yeah. Just don't care at all. You know,
Right.
there so many more interesting things for us to do and care about.
Right.
But, you know, my take was also always just like, imagine the practical implementation of that. Even if the government or the state or your job or whoever wanted to sit there and read every email, just think about how many people that would require. Nobody's going to hire that many people to do that.
What's the 1,000 monkeys sitting at 1,000 typewriters will one day write like the world's greatest novel or something?
Yeah, they'll eventually reproduce the works of Shakespeare.
Yeah. So 1,000 monkeys sitting at 1,000 computers will eventually be able to read every email.
Yeah, exactly. Another theory that people had about the whole was that it was part of HARP, a weather experimentation program that a lot of conspiracy theorists believe exists. So people would say that it was being used for weather control because they would claim that there were weird weather events around the hole itself, including reports of, you know, a thundercloud formed over the hole and lightning shot out of the ground, things like that.
So I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Okay, go for it.
I am not going to dismiss that people observed microclimate phenomena. I'm not saying that the government has a secret base in that hole and they're controlling the weather. To be clear, that is not what I'm saying. But based on elevation and wind patterns, the microclimates do exist. We've talked about this a little bit. There's a mountain in Orange County. To call it a mountain is a gross exaggeration. It is a hill, but that hill is just high enough that there's a microclimate at the top where there's a type of butterfly that only lives on that mountain in that region.
Really?
Yeah, it's Okanichi. There's a butterfly up there that only lives on the top of Okanichi Mountain.
That is wild. I had no idea. That's fascinating.
Doesn't appear anywhere else in the region. And it's because there's a microclimate there where the conditions are, you know, ideal for it. The same way certain areas will be more prone to get snow or Mebane, North Carolina.
Right.
I could throw a rock and hit Mebane. It'd be a long throw, but it's that close. They will get snow. I won't.
Here in Durham is sort of bisected by the Durham Freeway, which is a fascinating topic. And one day we should do an episode about it because the history of its construction is really messed up. But Durham's weather is basically split in two by the Durham Freeway. And if you live south of the freeway, it can snow north of the freeway and you'll just never see a thing.
So playing devil's advocate, again, I'm trying to like rationalize people's stories, right? So like missiles,
Sure.
Okay, I can rationalize missiles and why people would think that. A giant hole, it's fantastical. But if you're into that sort of thing, like you can find examples of that in nature or man-made, you know, whatever. Microclimates, they exist. I don't know anything about the actual part of Chatham County, that block of geography to definitively say like, yes, there's a microclimate there. I don't know that, but I could accept that one existed.
Right. But what was it actually? It was a telecommunications facility operated for the government by AT&T.
Yep. That's what I had heard. Okay.
This was a node in a vast network of military telecommunications centers referred to as AUTOVON, AUTOVON, or the Automated Voice Network. There were 60 plus sites nationwide that were nodes in Autobahn. And the idea with Autobahn is probably one of the ideas that inspired the internet in some ways, because the idea with Autobahn was we'll create a bunch of telecommunications nodes nationwide. And then if something happens to some of them, we're talking about a nuclear war. If something takes out a bunch of them, the rest of them will still be able to operate.
So it's like a mesh.
Exactly. And there were a ton of these up and down the East Coast, along the Eastern Seaboard, and along the West Coast as well.
Missiles and telephones all up and down the coasts. I mean, it sounds fantastical, and I am old enough to have seen the facilities in a state of great disrepair, but I know that they were there, right? So like, I know that. You go a couple years older and people would remember the facilities being open. It might seem strange to folks that are listening if they're a little bit younger than I am, because the facility that I was talking about having explored, we'll call it, is no longer there. It's been bulldozed. Government sold the land and somebody bulldozed it, and it's whatever. But these facilities existed.
This is, like I said, one of the places that inspired Stranger Things. Construction on the Chatham County Hull began in 1964. It opened for operation in 1966, and the local staff referred to it exclusively as the Hull or Big Hull, and that's where Big Hull Road comes from.
Big Hull Road.
People who worked for AT&T who worked there just referred to it that way. And that was also considered exceptionally secret. And the people who worked there were very secretive about their jobs, and they did not talk about it outside of the facility. To the point that in 2000, when the Indy did their story on it, at the time, mayor of Pittsburgh, the town right down the highway from Big Hole, was a former engineer at the Big Hole, and everybody knew this. And when they asked him about it, he said, "We don't talk about it, and I'm not going to talk about it with you." And that was that. The facility, in theory, shut down in the 90s, but we're going to get to that too. At the time that it was built and operational, it was considered a big secret, but it wasn't really a big secret. I mean, like you said, now there's a sign for Big Hole Road. But as recently as 2000, it was remarked upon that Big Hole Road had no sign, but was always meticulously maintained.
Well, the road people live on it too. There are residences.
Nobody lives on. Well, actually, no, I think somebody does live on Big Hole Road now.
They do. I got pictures.
Oh, okay. The connecting road that it's off of, Mount Gilead Road, was always one of the really badly maintained country roads out of Northeast Chatham County. Potholes and the paint worn off and just bad shape. And then jutting off of it was this meticulously maintained, constantly repaved road that everybody called Big Hole Road, but had no sign, and people were not supposed to go down. At the time, that part of Chatham County was way more rural than it is now. A quote from the Indy article that I keep talking about. Albert LaFrance, a Cold War communications historian in Alexandria, Virginia, who explores the local impact of national security installations like Big Hole, says that these facilities often give rise to unwarranted but understandable suspicions. When something like that is secret, there's a natural tendency to expect a dramatic James Bond type of activity, while in fact there are lots of things which have to be kept secret that aren't particularly exciting, he says. Most of the stories I've heard, though inaccurate, are pretty reasonable given that the neighbors generally have no contact with the facility staff and aren't given any information.
I mean, even now, as soon as you turn onto the road, it says private, no trespassing. You go about 100 yards down the road, there's another set of signs that says private road, no trespassing. And you can see further down, there's a bit of a bend. You can see that there's residents. I did not go any further than that because of who I had in the car with me. So I did not actually go up to the gate. That individual that I mentioned that has used that communications network in the past that you were talking about said, "Hey, you want to go drive up to the gate?" And I was like, yeah, one day. This was not that day, and I haven't taken him up on that yet, but maybe I will for the follow-up.
In doing some reading about Autobahn was really fascinating. It was designed to support telephone communications, like voice communications, but people who worked in those facilities could make free long distance calls to anywhere else on the Autobahn network. And at its peak, the Autobahn network was handling something like 1 million calls a day between different military facilities, which I think is really interesting. There are some people who were willing to speak off the record in the time since the facility was in theory closed, who said that it was what they called at the time an AT&T long lines hut, which is just another way of referring to that sort of node in a big long distance communications network. And, I have definitely known of other AT&T facilities where one would not have expected there to be secret rooms or whatever, but supposedly there were. And Wired magazine 15 years or so ago did a big expose of secret AT&T facilities in basically every place there is an AT&T facility. Not necessarily secret in terms of doing anything bad, but secret in terms of it's something that's covered under an agreement with the government to serve some sort of official purpose. And so it's considered some degree of government secret.
You might not know the answer to this. Did they have like special phone numbers?
I don't totally know the answer to that. My guess would be yes.
That'd be cool.
At one point, I did see a picture that somebody had taken of the sort of phone that was used on the Autobahn network, and it wasn't a normal phone. Okay. It was just a keypad, and the numbers were red, and then like a ton of wires.
Okay, so his numbers wasn't like pictograms. It wasn't like purple apple, monkey, crescent moon.
They didn't use hieroglyphs on this to make sure that it was encrypted in some way. It was a phone that didn't have the casing of the phone. It just had all the parts of the phone that were necessary. It was really interesting looking. And that itself was a kind of aesthetic choice that I felt like they were making of like, oh, this is so serious. We didn't even put the thing in a case. But it was very cool looking.
Nice.
The facility is still guarded, but in theory, the Autobahn network was retired starting in 1996 and completed its retirement in 97 or 98. And the official story is that the facility stopped being used for that at that time. And that's part of why in 2000 they were able to find some people who were willing to talk about it. Because in theory, everyone who worked there at that point had either retired or moved to some other job in AT&T, or they had moved to some other position within the government, whatever. But in theory, it was no longer in use, except that it's still guarded to this day.
Mm-hmm. So now it's like the silo in Resident Evil with the Umbrella Corporation. There's all these different levels and the mutants are on the bottom.
Exactly. Yes. It's definitely chock full of mutants. At the time, the official Defense Department explanation was that they were going to transition over to a data network and it was going to use different facilities, different physical infrastructure everywhere. Mm-hmm. And so they just didn't need Autobahn anymore, which makes sense. That's around when the internet was really starting to be more broadly used, and it was especially being more broadly used within government. And there had been a big push to modernize a lot of government communications at the time. And so it makes sense that they would switch everything over to a data network. And at the time, a lot of people said, well, they're probably keeping it guarded because it's a safety hazard to have a big empty facility down there that somebody, I'm not going to name names, but somebody could go exploring in it and wind up getting trapped. And you have somebody who dies down there, that would be awful. Yeah. Or somebody, there's just a simple liability question of like, what if you didn't guard it? The problem with that theory is that there are other Autobahn facilities that are known that operated very similarly and were sort of mysterious facilities in their local area that had lots of parking space on the surface and in theory, tiny little buildings that definitely were not on top of any sort of underground bunkers. And those facilities are no longer guarded.
Yeah. I mean, somebody uses it for something, right?
Yeah, my personal pet theory is that they didn't just retire this place and then switch to using a different network. They built the data network into these facilities, just repurposed them.
Yeah.
And it's still in use, probably still supported by AT&T. And now it's just doing data communications instead of voice communications.
So hear me out. I'm going to get real weird with it now.
Go for it.
AT&T is laying fiber optic cable out in rural Orange and into Chatham County right now.
Are they?
Yes. Coincidence?
I think not coincidence, because they've pushed residential fiber out to places in ways that are just so expensive, but they have done it really aggressively.
Yes.
In places that Google, for instance, in the Triangle hasn't been willing to go. You could live in a shack on the side of Okanagan Mountain and AT&T will show up at your door and ask when you'd like your fiber installed.
So maybe it's like a secret fiber hub.
I wouldn't shock me at all.
And then, that infrastructure is already there. So why not make a buck on the commercial side and, segment off part of that hub, and that's where you route your stuff through.
Yeah.
All right, cool. So if I disappear, it's because we cracked the secret of the of the whole, and it's been real. Thank you for joining this show. My family will be very disappointed.
So most of the locations that are known to have been part of Autobahn are basically abandoned now, but there are quote unquote former Autobahn locations that are still very actively guarded and still actively in use for some reason. And they tend to be in a line up the East Coast between Florida and New Jersey.
Just repurposed them. So
exactly. That's all it is. They just turned them into the data centers for this data network that's in use by the military.
I buy that.
Yeah. So some other similar sites in the Carolinas to talk about real quick. One is another probably decommissioned Autobahn location, and it's in Stanfield. That's about 30 miles outside of Charlotte. It was definitely another node in Autobahn. It was decommissioned and emptied out. And WFAE, the local NPR affiliate in Charlotte, received a listener request to see what was up with this quote unquote secret facility. So WFAE looked into who owned the place. They called the people who owned the property and said, can you tell me what your facility is? And the people who own it now said, yeah, we'll give you a tour.
Cool.
So do you want to watch that real quick? I'm not sure that it'll make it into the episode because I'm not sure that this will be great listening for everybody else.
Yeah, no, I'm into it. While we were talking, I just Googled Autobahn phone on eBay, popped that into Google, and then hopped over to eBay. You can buy one for $1,200.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the low price of $1,200.
Okay, I'm going to share my screen and we're going to watch this video real quick.
So recently we had a listener write in asking about an old Cold War bunker that was outside of Charlotte.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's the story. I'm going to cut that story out of this episode because we don't have the rights to reproduce it. But to just like cover a couple of things that are mentioned in that, they had somebody who worked in that facility in Stanfield confirm that, yeah, this was part of Autobahn and it was meant to survive a nuclear war. There's a diagram that they show that's an artist's representation of how the bunker was sunk into the ground. And there's some really good information about the Chatham County hole being designed similarly. Basically, bottom line being, it's this massive structure that has also electromagnetic shielding built into it so that the equipment inside would survive an EMP, an electromagnetic pulse from a nuclear blast. In the 60s, when this was located in Chatham County, that put it an easy hour outside of Raleigh. And so the theory being, well, if in a nuclear war, every major metropolitan center and some of the middle range metropolitan centers like state capitals or Stanfield, 30 minutes outside of Charlotte, which at the time would have probably been about an hour outside of Charlotte, was, you know, those are places that are far enough from those metropolitan areas that they're going to be less directly impacted. And they're also places that are geologically stable. And the facilities are designed to sit on sort of a bed of looser material that could move and the facility would stay stable on top of it. So an earthquake, for instance, wouldn't take this out automatically.
Man, this is cool. I really like that video. We should put it in the show notes and people should check it out.
Yeah, there will be a link to that in the show notes so that everybody else can watch this video too. Many thanks to WFAE of Charlotte for having chased this story down and gotten a great interview and story. The thing is, nobody's able to do that at the one in Chatham County.
Right, because it still has guards and nobody wants to talk and it's still being used for something. I suspect it's, if not government, then somehow tied into their rollout of fiber optic lines.
Yeah.
And there's nothing nefarious about that, to be clear. There's nothing nefarious about like leveraging infrastructure to offer better services to your customers.
No, there's nothing evil about that. One of the things about the Stanfield facility in that story, they mentioned that they wish that somebody would come along and turn it into something like condos. And that made me think, A, that would be kind of fun. B, that would be awful. But C, think about real estate in a place like the Triangle. You could sell those condos for a ton of money here. So there's no way that facility is just sitting there empty today.
What if you played laser tag?
Oh my God. Laser tag.
That'd be so fun.
That would be amazing. Okay. That's what
until the mutants got you. If you went down too far and then
maybe you need two settings on your laser tag rifle. One of them is laser tag and one of them is anti-mutant laser.
I feel like that could get pretty dangerous.
Yeah.
What happened to Timmy? Yeah, I didn't check the laser before I used it. Sorry.
Whoops. Didn't have it set for stun. Another similar interesting facility that I've read a little bit about in North Carolina is Harvey Point. That's way out on the coast. It was originally established as a naval facility to conduct anti-submarine air surveillance in World War II. Now it's used to conduct advanced training, especially like counterterrorism training and sort of terrorism response training for emergency services and military. It was the location used by SEAL Team 6 to train to raid Osama bin Laden's compound. They built an exact replica of the place where they knew he was and then practiced raiding it at Harvey Point.
Very cool.
It's also used to test explosives. And so the people around it constantly complain of like big booming noises. It's also still used by the Navy for test flights and training flights. And it's just up the coast, a little ways from places like Sunset Beach and Ocracoke, where people report UFOs, which made me think of our UFO story about UFOs over the eastern coastline.
Yeah.
And then Fort Macon State Park, which is basically right around the corner from Harvey Point. Fort Hampton, it was built in 1756, about 300 yards away from the current site of Fort Macon, but it washed into the sea in a hurricane in 1825. It was such an important location, the coast of North Carolina and South Carolina, for observing shipping and piracy, that they immediately built Fort Macon the next year, 1826. It's been commissioned, fought over, and decommissioned again multiple times. It was purchased by the state of North Carolina in 1924 as the second state park in the then brand new state park system. And it was last garrisoned for military service as a secret anti-submarine observation post during World War II, when the Navy had dudes live in that old 19th century fort and use these long, narrow windows that were built into the fort as a way to observe the sea lanes to look for signs of submarines on the coast of North Carolina.
There's a lot. Fort Fisher was used for submarine spotting as well. I mean, it's not like a hole or anything, but there was a lot. That was a real concern in World War II. There's one story I've heard of German sailors coming ashore and then like going back out.
At some point, we're going to have to do at least a mini episode about German submarines, German U-boat activity off the coast of the Carolinas, because that happened in both North and South Carolina and was very well documented.
Hello, we are definitely Nazi Germans.
We are here for the barbecue.
And we would like the vinegar-based sauce. Please.
So there are also a lot of really garbage conspiracy theories. I'm just going to say that they're garbage about underground secret bases throughout the Carolinas, especially in the Great Smoky Mountains of Western North Carolina. And I'm going to talk about two really garbage theories real quick because I want to point out that they're garbage.
Okay.
One, Hintuga Round Bottom Road, way up in the mountains in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park. There is a conspiracy theory that there is a giant underground secret military base in the mountains. And partly this is founded on UFO sightings, and partly this is founded on people's claims that they can, quote unquote, hear big machines underground. And the idea being like, there are big bases down there. Those bases are being used to dig tunnels, all kinds of stuff. All of this is garbage. And a lot of this theory rests on the idea that this one road, Hintuga Round Bottom Road, is being used to like transport military equipment in and out of the mountains. If you actually go there, or if you even just use something like Google Maps to take a little tour of the place, what you see is that it is a one-lane gravel road that is only accessible for a few months out of the year. And that is only when no trees have fallen down and nothing has like washed out the river.
It sounds to me like somebody is familiar with the West Virginia bunker for DC. Strategically, I wonder what the point would be.
It makes no sense to me as a theory.
Because there are underground, basically towns. You know, the government owns underground towns like Colorado. Like you can drive a semi-truck into some of these facilities that are essentially a fully functioning self-contained town inside of a mountain for secure reasons. But strategically, it makes sense based on the geographic location and the mission of that facility.
Yeah. But the Great Smoky Mountains, you don't get earthquakes often, and they're not huge, but earthquakes happen there. I remember earthquakes from when I was a child. So it's not geologically stable enough to be a good place. The road's narrow. You can't drive it with a normal car. You've got to at least use an SUV, but it's so narrow that you can only basically get a Jeep down it. Also, it's a place where people go camping all the time. There are actual like campsites, but then it's also a place where it's okay to just go camp in the woods. You just go hammock camping if you want to. And there's a big nature preserve. It's just not the sort of place where there's a big military base. It would be so dumb to try to put a big military base there in the first place. One of the reasons people like to talk about it is because of the Masonic marker, which is this big, publicly discussed, often photographed monument put together by donations from a whole bunch of chapters of different Masons groups in the United States. National Parks Traveler, which is a website that's associated with the National Park Service, has done a story on it. It's really beautiful. It's really interesting. It's also on a little piece of property that's like fenced off so that people will stop graffitiing it. But, you know, it's just a little memorial marker that they can go and like have a little reunion at once a year. And all that to me adds up to a pristine wild area, not a highly developed military presence. The mountains are beautiful. The Blue Ridge Parkway is a treasure. Go check it out. If you like camping in the woods with no facilities and no support, it sounds like a great place to do that. But this is not a place where the Army is driving Humvees in and out.
Till the mutants come up out of the hole and drag you back.
Right. And then there's the Pisgah Astronomical Research Institute in Rosman, North Carolina. I mentioned this vaguely in a previous episode where I mentioned that I grew up near a place that we found out later was a listening post.
Yeah.
Originally, this was a DoD facility monitoring Soviet satellite communications. That's the part they'll say publicly, so who knows what it was doing. And it was handling some of NASA's communications with astronauts when they passed over the East Coast, because it's a place with very little in the way of electromagnetic interference, and it's high up, and you've got a clear shot at the sky. It was chosen for these tasks due to its isolation. It's hard to get to. If somebody wanted to try to sneak to it, they'd have to walk an awfully long way, things like that. But these days, it's the Pisgah Astronomical Research Institute. It's a nonprofit doing STEM education. They do planetarium shows and they run science camps all summer. And my thing is, it's probably not a secret military base, which is one of the conspiracy theories, that it is yet another of these giant underground bases in the Smoky Mountains. Probably not a secret military base, because I don't really see them letting a bunch of curious kids who want to go to space camp climb around on top of it for 10 weeks a year.
Yeah. I mean, these really cool secret underground facilities exist, but just because you want one to be near you doesn't make it so.
Yeah. But that then raised the question for me of, would I ever use any of these in a book?
Sure.
And sure, Pari would be great as a location to like be the cover up for some sort of secret site. If you take out the space camp part, that's going to be really difficult to write around.
No, that's a kid's movie or a kid's book.
Oh, okay.
Leave the space camp part in and the kids find it.
Okay. For a book. Yeah, I like that.
It's however you want, that's an angle, right?
You sort of have to take the YA approach of assuming that the adult world is incompetent in major ways.
Right.
Yeah, I like
Kids
that.
would love that.
They would.
That was very nice and accommodating of you saying I don't write for children. So you're going, they would.
Yeah, I don't write YA. I mean, there's nothing wrong with it. That's great. There's a lot of things I don't write, and there's a lot of people who write and don't write what I do.
That was very polite of you. Thank you. I appreciate your you're not telling me to shut up.
No, have a ball. This is the fun part. But if I were going to write any of these places, whether it's Huntuga around Bottom Road or Pari or the Chatham Hole or anything like that, into a story, I think what I would do is not make them secret military sites. I would make them secret observation posts, especially up in the mountains, keeping tabs on places where the world of humankind intersects with and borders on the worlds of the Fae. We talked a little about that in Brown Mountain Lights, where I'm just really enamored of that idea that a lot of these sort of phenomena are that.
They're not mutants, they're goblins.
Goblins. There you go. Just stick one of the Uwaris and we're good.
There you go. Writes itself.
I wouldn't want it to be G.I. Joe up there taking pot shots at Bigfoot. I would want Mulder and Scully if they're trying to figure out when, not if, hikers go missing in the night. Is it because they were taken, or do they wind up in Fairy by mistake? And then if, not when, they come back, is that them, or is that their fetch, their doppelganger?
That's great. I like it. You should do that. I say very dismissively, like, yeah, that's awesome. You go do that. You go put all that work in.
And having come up with that in the course of doing these notes, I was like, oh, I need to actually write down some of that stuff for a book. So that's something I probably will write one day.
Well, that's fun. And I got to make a goblin reference.
That's the Chatham County Hole story. Probably a node in a big military data network. And the reason why it's still guarded is because they're still using it.
That's all, folks. But no, thank you for listening. Check out arcanecarolinas.com. Big thanks to our Patreon backers for contributing to us picking this story. We have some really exciting stuff planned. The next episode of the zine will be out in June, and there will be a great pack in for that one.
Awesome. Thanks for listening.
I don't know how to close it.
Much like the Hole, probably.
Yeah, they're just like, you know what? Let's just keep it open. It's fine.
Yeah, whatever. It'll be cheaper to hire a guy to stand out front than it will be to ever fill it in.
Right.
15.
You've been listening to Arcane Carolinas. Thanks for joining us. If you liked it, give us a rating, leave a comment. If you didn't like it, send us an email and tell us why. If you're not wrong, we'll try to fix it.
And if you're interested in award-winning speculative fiction, including science fiction, urban fantasy, and horror, find me, Michael G. Williams, at www.michaelgwilliamsbooks.com and check out Falstaff Books at falstaffbooks.com.
If you'd like to pick up some Arcane Carolinas merch, look at behind-the-scenes info, pictures, videos, stuff like that, all the things that get cut, check out arcanecarolinas.com, where you can get access to our Patreon, our Facebook, our Twitter, our Instagram, all that in one place, including the merch store. Buy a shirt.
Clothe your body.
Drape your body in our wares.
Be our living billboards. Did you hear that just now?
No, was it AT&T?
No, it was my cat.